organizations and leaders, and don't make fun of me when I say this, need to start having some meetings about meetings.
Yeah. What would happen if we just told the truth?
Welcome to TruthWorks, where we dig into the nitty-gritty of leadership and work.
And what needs to change? I'm Jessica Neal.
And I'm Patty McCord.
Our journey together started in HR, but trust us, it's evolved into something wild, honest, and, well, a bit rebellious.
So throw out the handbook. We're here to redefine rules to work for us, not against us.
Let's dive into another episode. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of TruthWorks. I'm Jessica Neal here with my adorable co-host, Patty McCord.
Hello. Adorable to you.
And today we have the honor of speaking to Stephen Rogelberg, who wrote two wonderful books. One is Glad We Met, and the other is The Surprising Science of Meetings. You know, I'm so excited, Stephen, because Patty and I have talked about meetings and the efficiency of meetings for our entire careers.
Yeah, right.
And have tried to crack the nut on what makes them good and what doesn't. And it's always a controversial topic in any organization that you go into. And I love all the data you have about how much time we spend in meetings and like the fact that people hate them. So I want you to like tell people all about that. But before we get into meetings, I kind of want you to introduce yourself to our listeners. But I also want to know, why did you choose meetings? How did this happen?
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And yeah, I'm Stephen Rogelberg. I am a dad, a friend, a son, a brother, and a professor. And I have been doing research on meetings for over 20 years. I was pretty much the first organizational psychologist to do that. And it's been really gratifying to see that this area of meeting science has exploded. And now we have such great information to bring out to the community, which has been one of the incredible things to watch with these books going viral. I never expected it, but it just speaks to people's thirst for solving this very vexing problem.
Mm-hmm. Well, what got you onto it, if you were the first?
So I'm really interested in understanding pain at work. And meetings are certainly a source of pain. And I was really concerned that people are having days at work filled with meetings and yet returning home at the end of those days just not having any sense of accomplishment. Mm-hmm. And that was very troubling to me because if that's what our workforce and our global workforce is experiencing, that is incredibly unhealthy. Mm-hmm. And so that was really my entry point, was examining how meetings kind of affect the well-being and feelings of productivity of people. And then it just exploded because there's so many interesting topics as it relates to meetings. So we definitely have stayed busy.
Yeah, it's such a vast kind of thing once you start opening it up and peeling the onion, because there are so many different types of meetings. There's one-on-ones, there's the big team meeting, there's the company all hands, there's the executive leadership meetings. And you're right, a lot of them are not run well. And you have a lot of pain in the organization and a lot of people walking away feeling dissatisfied with work. But I think the unfortunate thing is they're dissatisfied with work, but they also don't understand what is important and what they should be working on. And that's what meetings are for, right?
Or even the why of it. You know, my son recently got promoted and I said, "Oh, what's the difference going to be in your job?" He's like, "Oh, I won't work anymore. I'll just go to meetings."
True.
Yeah. That's not far from truth at all. I mean, really, there's approximately 1 billion meetings a day around the globe.
I read that.
And so it's pretty tremendous. And then, you know, there's data to suggest that basically as you move up the organizational hierarchy, right, you could be spending 75% to 90% of your time in meetings. So that's clearly a lot of meetings. And it's a very important topic. It's so interesting because so many organizations and so many, chief talent and chief human resource officers all have a very kind of a lackadaisical relationship to meetings. It's almost like we assume it's the cost of doing business. And that is such a missed opportunity. Meetings cost organizations way more than their entire IT budget, right? When you think about time by salaries, it's way more expensive. And yet we take that investment very seriously, right? We even have chief technology officers who monitor that investment. And so we really care about that. And we're constantly reaching out, making sure our technology is meeting our needs. But when it comes to meetings, we just say, hey, yeah, bad meetings, it's just what it is. We're going to complain about them, but we're not going to really invest in doing something about them.
Yeah.
One of the biggest sins that I saw in my career was that, like HR initiatives, they never die. I remember one of our executives saying, I can't possibly have that conversation with her, Patty, that I've been telling you I was going to have for 3 weeks because my calendar's completely blocked. And I had him print it and I took a Sharpie. I'm like, what's the purpose of this meeting and why are you here? Yeah. Oh, well, that's a meeting we've had for, what's the purpose of this meeting and why are you here? Did we just hire somebody to manage that for you? Yeah. Okay, then you don't need to be there anymore. Yeah. I'm like, look at that. 6 hours.
Yeah. There we go.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's talk about a couple of big things like meeting creep, how big they need to be. How do you step back? I think is that what you do? Do you coach people to just step back and look at them?
Yeah, my work focuses on leaders as well as organizations trying to create better meeting cultures. So typically we do a meeting culture assessment. We start doing audits of activities and trying to do the fabulous exercise that you did, Patty, just trying to eliminate those that we don't need. But first, I think it's important to remember that a world without meetings is actually much more problematic than the world with meetings. Meetings are an evolution over the command and control systems of the Industrial Revolution, where the human element of work was marginalized. So meetings are a recognition that people's voice matters, that we want to engage their hearts and their minds. Meetings are essential for communication, cooperation, consensus decision-making. So we need meetings. And in many regards, organizational democracy takes place in meetings.
Yeah.
But with that said, we certainly can pare some out. There's some meeting habits that we just have. But there's other opportunities that I think are even more meaningful than just saying, hey, I need to go on a meeting diet. Namely, there's some better meeting choices that people can make. Right. So when we think about losing weight, right, you could do a draconian diet and we know they don't work. But we can try to teach healthy habits. And these healthy habits, hopefully, they do tend to work over time. So, for example, here's a couple examples.
Low carb meeting diet. We're about to do that. High protein here. Yeah.
So here's an example of a healthy habit. When we think about how long a meeting should be, right, most meetings are an hour or 30 minutes. That's not intentional. That's just us defaulting to what our Google and Outlook calendars tell us to do. That's not a meaningful reason to have a meeting for that length, especially given something called Parkinson's Law. And Parkinson's Law is the idea that work expands to fill whatever time is allotted to it. So if a meeting is scheduled for an hour, magically it will take
an hour.
But we can actually use Parkinson's Law to our advantage, right? Because there's a good side to it. If we schedule our meetings for 22 minutes, we're actually going to get it done in 22 minutes. And so basically, that is one very easy habit is just decreasing the length of meetings and do it pretty aggressively. And then if that new length isn't working, you can always increase it again. But that's an easy step.
Yeah. The other thing you said that rang true with me was like the purpose of meetings is to hear people's voices. And I'm sure this is going to be on your list, but I loved them on Zoom during the pandemic. You have, 27 people, 27 squares, and only 2 squares are talking.
Yes.
And I used to be on those and go, this is an email.
Yep.
Right. We're not hearing anybody's voice. Like if the purpose of the meeting is to hear people's voices, then they would have to speak or we'd have to call on them.
Dang, that's so true. And Patty, the funny thing is, as meeting size increases, feelings of inclusion decreases.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
So we often invite, right, out of this spirit of inclusion, but it actually has the exact opposite effect.
Uh-huh.
People feel like you're just checking a box and it doesn't feel genuine.
What's the trick there? Let's talk about that for a second. So, as a leader and at Netflix, Patty and I were constantly trying to figure out like what the right meeting culture was.
Mhm.
We went from like you had to send out an agenda. People got to choose whether they wanted to come based on the agenda if it was important to them, blah, blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah. Really being careful and intentional to include the right people. But there were some meetings where, you did need the whole team there or, what have you. But that's not really a meeting to have a debate or discussion when you have a lot of people in the room. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
There was a lot there, and you had a lot of really interesting things you just teed up. There's so much I want to say. So
Say it all.
I'm about to explode.
Explode.
Basically, let me share with you kind of a radical response, and then we'll unpack it in less radical ways. So basically, organizations and leaders, and don't make fun of me when I say this, need to start having some meetings about meetings.
Yeah.
Okay. But
Yeah.
really, how could we not? Right? If there's a billion of these things each day and we know our people are wallowing and not thriving, why do we feel like that's a silly thing to do?
Yeah.
Right? We don't mind going back to this IT example, right? We ask people, hey, is this working for you? What technology do you need? Right? This is the kind of conversation that we need to have about meetings.
Mhm.
Leaders need to sit down with their people and say, hey, okay, let's do an audit of our current meetings, what's working, what's not. Let's talk about when we need to call a meeting versus not. Let's talk about how do we do invitations to meetings. And let's figure out a way that if someone doesn't go to a meeting, here's the agreed upon way of keeping that person in the loop. And by doing these types of conversations, now you're resetting the norms.
Mhm.
Because one of the things that's really fascinating is that while people detest meetings so often, they also get really worried if they're not invited to a
Yep.
meeting.
That FOMO.
Yeah. FOMO.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So by having these conversations, we can start to push the reset button, right? And say, okay, when you're not invited to a meeting, that's actually a sign of respect.
Mhm.
And here's what we're going to do to make sure that you're in the loop. And you should know that in any future meetings you want to attend, you can, right? So we have this agreed upon way of keeping people in the loop, a normative expectation. And that really works wonders for starting to decrease meeting sizes.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So I like that approach.
Yeah.
Another nice approach is thinking about inviting people for part of the meeting, but not all of the meeting.
Yep.
Yeah. We
Right.
tried that too. Yes. And it
And
worked.
Yeah.
Okay, good. And
Yeah.
so that works really well for decreasing these meeting sizes. The other thing that, when I do these retreats with these organizations about meeting size, it's almost analogous to planning a wedding, right? So you're planning your wedding list. You have your nice to haves and your must haves. The must haves are very clear.
Mhm.
Right.
We know who actually has to be
Mhm.
there.
Mhm.
It's the nice to haves. Those are the ones that get us in trouble because once
Yeah.
we do one nice to have,
You got to do
now
all.
we're like, yes, now we have to invite Cousin Ernie too.
Uh-huh.
And we haven't seen Cousin Ernie for 30 years, but we got to invite Cousin Ernie. So we need to not invite these nice to haves. We just
Yeah.
want to validate the importance of the nice to haves, let them realize that we're going to keep them in the loop and that they can change their minds. But we don't even want to make the nice to haves make a decision to come or not, right? Because that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
Yep.
they're probably going to come because they
Exactly.
feel like if they don't,
And
they're
complain that
gonna
it was
look-
a waste
yeah,
of time.
they're going to look bad or,
Exactly.
Right,
not
right.
get promoted. Yeah.
Exactly. So if you combine these two things that we've just talked about, right? We combine decreasing the meeting size, and it's not hard to do because people are hungry for it.
Yeah.
We discussed decreasing the length of a meeting. Those two things together are actually much better strategies than just going on a wholesale diet around
Mhm.
meetings, right? Because that's actually going to return tremendous amounts of time to
Mhm.
people. And then they'll be well received, assuming you've had some of these conversations around meetings.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
love the part about how you said, and we'll also discuss how the information is going to be disseminated. because one of my jobs when I was at Netflix was to be the person at the end of our executive team meetings. And my job was to say, have we made any decisions here today? And if we have, how are we going to communicate them? And when are we going to do
Love it.
Because I would find somebody would be like, oh, I'm going to talk about it at my team meeting tomorrow afternoon. And I'm like, well, great. Neil doesn't have his until a week later, and they'll all know.
Mm-hmm.
Because as soon as one team knows, the whole company will know in 42 seconds.
Yeah.
So that timing was, and the other thing was, it was really great to get consensus about, oh, well, I'm going to tell my team about it on Monday. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. Tell them what? We didn't actually make a decision here.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We just discussed, you have an opinion, but that's not our decision.
Right.
So, I mean, there's also the protocol of like what actually occurs and how do you disseminate it later.
So, Patty, I love what you describing. It's fabulous. And one of the things that I talk about in my books and when I do trainings is this idea that meetings end, but they typically don't have an ending.
Aha.
And those are very different things.
Yeah.
They end, but they don't have an ending.
Great way to think about it.
And the best practice is within 5-7 minutes left, you stop. You stop, full stop.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a review of, okay, here's what we decided. And for each of these things, you identify the DRI, which is Apple talk for directly responsible individual.
Mm-hmm.
And you also clarify what wasn't decided and what you're going to do about it. Basically, you don't want anyone to leave your meeting wondering what was discussed.
But I think it's so important because what happens, to your point, is you run the clock, right? Whatever Outlook or Google tells you to do. You're at the end of the hour. You never leave enough space or time to have a discussion.
Or everybody just gets up and leaves.
Yeah, because they got to go to the next meeting.
Yeah.
So they don't want to be late.
No.
When you have a good meeting culture, and we did, I think most people at Netflix tried very hard to do this, to save 5 to 10 minutes at the end for wrapping up. And I just don't think enough companies do that. They're just running to the next thing. There's no clarity. There's no decision. There's no, sort of what we're going to cascade, who's going to cascade it. Yeah. And the other thing that you said that was so important, who owns it?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. So I want to share with you both something I think you might really enjoy, which is kind of an alternative way of creating an agenda for a meeting that kind of speaks to what we've been speaking about.
Do share.
Okay. So as you know, most agendas are framed as a set of topics to be discussed. So what I want to challenge leaders to do is to create their agendas as a set of questions to be answered.
Ooh.
By framing your agenda as questions to be answered, now you have to really stop and think, why are you having the meeting? It's to answer these questions.
Right.
By framing your agenda as questions, you have a much better sense of who to invite. They're relevant to the questions. You know if the meeting has been successful. The questions have been answered. Mm-hmm. Questions also serve to really motivate and engage people because we love answering questions. Mm-hmm. In fact, you put a question in the invite, people can't help but jump right in. Mm-hmm. And then here's the kicker. If you just can't think of any questions, it likely means you don't need a meeting.
Yeah, you don't need a meeting.
If it's a status update,
send an email.
Or, Slack or whatever it is that you use. Oh, that is I love it. You're right. It's like this complete brain turnaround.
It is. It is.
Because it invites you to be prepared, which is the other thing that makes me crazy about meetings is everybody gets in the room and everybody's like, yeah, what are we talking about today?
Yeah. It's just a small little switch that has very profound effects, right? Because, when you start thinking of as questions and then it's like, oh, who do we need to answer these questions? That's good. Did our meeting work? Yeah, the questions were answered. And I love the thought. If you can't think of a question,
don't have
and
it.
And if you don't have people in the room that can answer, it's the wrong attendance. It's the wrong attendee list, right?
So good. Can we unpack the one-on-one? Because there's this whole revolution over the last year. Get rid of the one-on-one. One-on-ones aren't necessary.
No.
I don't believe that. I just don't.
Because it's wrong. Yes. So I'm glad you don't believe it.
Okay.
They're right. The only one-on-ones that should be eliminated are those that aren't being done well. But one-on-ones are some of the very most important meetings you could have. It is the one meeting that should never be an email. So let me back up and just make sure that we're clear on what a one-on-one is,
Yes.
what the research that I've been doing. So when I'm talking about a one-on-one, I'm talking about a meeting that's orchestrated and facilitated by a manager, but it's not for them.
Mm-hmm.
It's for their
And
people.
very important.
Yep.
Yes. It is not for them.
And I tell managers this all the time. It's not about you.
It's not about you.
It's
It is
about them.
It is about them. It is about them sharing what's on their minds, their concerns, their challenges, their obstacles, them asking for feedback, them asking for coaching. It's for them. It is this dedicated time for you to truly see your people. And that's what people are craving. They're craving being seen. This is why these one-on-ones are not for status updates, because status updates are for the manager. And managers can get status updates lots of different ways, right? They can ask for an email. They can do it in team meetings. They have lots of choices. This is just this small dedicated time where the employee can control the agenda and share what's on their minds. And when managers execute one-on-ones in that way, in a regular cadence, whether it's each week, every other week, each week appears to be the most ideal, by the way. And by the way, the amount of minutes matters less than the quality of the minutes. So the keys are regularity and dedicated minutes. It could just be 20 minutes. It doesn't have to even be an hour. But it's these 20 minutes where you are just focused on what the other person is saying and asking. And their agenda is your agenda. When you do that, the gains around them are incredible. You know, there's data to suggest that employees who receive one-on-ones, like I described, their engagement levels are 3 times greater than those that aren't. They report more productivity. Teams report more productivity. You know, we've all heard the adage that people don't leave bad jobs, they leave bad bosses.
Yep.
One-on-ones are your way to prove you're not a bad boss. They're the front lines of inclusion. And then the really surprising thing that came from the research was when managers committed to these things on this regular cadence, they actually reported having more time. And where they had more time, they reported being less interrupted throughout their days because people knew that they would have this uninterrupted time with their manager.
Yep.
The second thing is by doing these one-on-ones, employees were more successful the first time. People were more coordinated on the team. So there was less rework.
Right.
And this also promoted more productivity and more time for everyone. So one-on-ones, they are critical to leaders and organizations. Any organization that says we aren't doing one-on-ones, that is such a massive yellow light. Because basically, without saying it, you're basically saying,
I don't care.
We don't care about our people.
We don't care.
Yeah.
Forming a connection with our people, that doesn't really matter.
The other thing it does that, you know, I'm not a huge fan of sort of manager training. I love more activities that actually put you in the situation. And this teaches you you have to listen.
Yeah.
You have to learn to listen. And I mean, you know, if I could do one thing, the magic wand of like great leadership is not what you say, it's what you hear.
Yeah.
You know, and that's just such a great way to do that, to say,
True.
oh, wow, I wouldn't have thought about it that way, because you're not thinking out loud, you're listening.
You're listening. That's what you should be doing. And that's hard for a lot of people.
Yeah.
It takes time, but
And practice.
Yep.
But the rewards are tremendous. And it's interesting, if a manager stops and thinks for a moment about a time in their past when someone with power took a genuine interest in them and how it made them feel.
Yeah.
It's transformative.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
And basically, they're just giving that gift
Yeah.
to their people.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important to remember that with COVID, what people missed was not necessarily going into a building and doing work. What they missed was connection, genuine connection. And one-on-ones are the vehicle for genuine connection.
Yeah. Oh, you're giving me goosies. So I'm in venture capital now, and I coach all these lovely CEOs and founders, and I was talking to one the other. He's like, "Yeah, I'm not doing the one-on-ones anymore." And I was like, "Well, that's a missed opportunity." He's like,
Yeah.
"Why?" He's like, "They're a waste of time." I said, "Because you don't do them well."
Uh-huh.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
That's why they're a waste of
Yeah.
time, right?
That's right.
And so I love that concept, and it's not about you, and that's exactly what I told them. It's about them.
Yeah.
And the other thing that it allows for you to listen, but you get to listen to if they're doing the right things or not.
Yeah.
And you can help them. And that's why that
Yeah.
productivity goes
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
And
I
it
love
also makes those, what we perceive as these really difficult conversations, they're not that hard if you're pretty used to having a conversation. That's real.
Yes.
That's the winning point.
Yes.
Because when you build this foundation of trust and safety, it paves the way for future
Hard
conversations.
conversations.
And
Yeah.
the other related thing that people generally hate doing is providing feedback to someone.
Yep.
But in these one-on-ones, when the manager says to the employee, "Hey, is there anything that you would like some feedback on?" I'm happy to do it. If not, no worries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then person's going to say, "I'd love your thoughts on X."
Yeah.
And then it's much easier.
Yeah.
And I'd add, do you have feedback for me?
That's the bonus.
Yes. I mean, if you can get really good at that, these one-on-ones are incredible.
Yeah.
And you have the data, Stephen, that says that it makes us all more productive. Employees feel more engaged.
A lot of
Better
it.
business is happening.
Yep.
Things are moving
Yeah.
faster.
Yeah, the outcomes are clear. And the research on it's robust. I mean, Gallup did stuff with 1 million people, looking at one-on-ones. It's there. It's totally there. And I would really argue that one-on-ones are competitive advantage for organization.
Mhm.
That when you're doing them and doing them properly, you're basically creating an engaged workforce that's highly connected to the organization,
Yeah.
who doesn't feel frustrated, who's having their problems solved in real time. That sounds pretty good to me.
Yeah.
So the thought of eliminating one-on-ones.
I know.
What are you trying to accomplish?
Our boss,
Ridiculous.
when we worked at Netflix, CEO Reed Hastings, he'd do skip level one-on-ones
All the time.
all the time. And the information that he got, because he learned to listen, right, was so powerful, because he'd come back to the executive team and they'd say, well, pontificate, well, here, my team thinks this. He's like, well, that's not what they said.
True.
Right?
True.
Yeah. When I tell other CEOs that Reed spent all of his time in one-on-ones, they're like, no, he didn't. I'm like, yeah, he did.
Yeah.
He did.
That's right. That's where he
Pretty
spent
awesome.
all his time. And it was powerful. And there was the occasional thing where he, caused some friction.
Oh, yeah.
Somewhere.
Yeah.
But most 98% of the time, it was great.
Yeah.
Right. And the CEO having a conversation with you,
Powerful
skip
moment.
level,
Yeah.
pretty powerful.
Yeah.
And because it was a habit, people knew they were going to be next, right? And so the other beautiful thing about what you're saying is that it's like questions instead of subject matter. It invites you to be prepared. It invites you to show your best self, right?
Yeah.
And I think that part of the whole employee engagement shtick is that we just don't ask people to do it. Right? It's like, we're gonna talk about this. We're gonna expect you better come, show me your best work, your best self, and of course you will, because you're proud of it.
And this is my bone with organizations. Teach your managers how to have a good one-on-one. Nobody does.
Yeah.
Or model it, right? I mean,
or
that's the other
model it.
part, right?
Yeah. But everybody, they get promoted. They promote all these managers because they're good at their craft.
Yep.
Nobody teaches them how to. And I mean, that is the simplest thing to if you wanted to do manager training.
Yeah.
Yep.
Don't do manager one-on-one. Teach them how to have a good one-on-one.
Yep. Yeah.
And then solves a ton of problems.
I agree. I mean, that's I do a ton of it, and I love it, and it's so important. And it's so important to do, especially because what we have generally found is that managers have a blind spot. They think they're better at these things than they really are.
Uh-huh.
And you need to create some truth.
Well, they have a magic word on their title. I mean,
They're a
They're a
manager.
manager, right?
So now they've,
I always tell
made
people,
it.
congratulations, you've just been promoted. You have 2 things you didn't have yesterday. 1, a new word on your business card. And 2, now you're psychic.
Love it.
Okay. Stephen, we always ask our guests to leave our listeners with like a nugget. So what's the nugget you want to leave?
Be a good steward of others' time. Be a good steward of others' time, because you know how it feels when someone steals your time and doesn't honor it.
I love that. Do you have time, Stephen, for a career confession? Because we'd love to get your advice.
Let's do it.
Okay. I started a new hybrid role last year, which has mandatory office days twice a week. I thought I'd struggle with the working from home days, as in a previous role, I really enjoyed the office atmosphere and environment. But the energy in my new office is off, and the 2 colleagues that I gelled with the most have both left recently. The company culture was a key reason why. I don't find being in the office helps me do my job, as we're already a small team with minimal meetings that require physical attendance. I'm considering quitting, but I just quit another job recently because I wasn't the right fit for the role. And I'm worried that I'll look bad on my resume. So I think what this person's asking is, they have this new hybrid role. The company is not great culture-wise. Their buddies quit. And so should they look for a new role? And will it look bad on their CV? Or do they stay and kind of hang out in this bad culture with no buddies?
So I do think that having 2 short-term employment terms back to back could become an issue for them. So I would say to try to stay, but obviously if they're horribly miserable and it's incredibly unhealthy, then yes, they should leave. I also question, losing your buddies doesn't necessarily undermine the entire culture.
Right.
So I kind of want to unpack that a little bit more. But I would probably say that sometimes going into the location is an investment. And it's one of those things that you actually have to do more of to actually start reaping any of the benefits of it. So what I would probably argue is keep with this, give it a better shot, try some new rhythms for going in, try to do even more time in, and let it feel a little bit more homey. Let people see you a little bit more, start to build some of that comfort. And then when you start to back down and maybe have some more home time, perhaps there's some additional foundations that have been created that allow you to have this hybrid workplace kind of work for you a little bit more.
Yeah, I would also just sort of preach what you just taught us, which is step back and assess, how are you spending your time when you go into the office, right? Because it probably was natural just to hang out with your buddies. And now you have to rethink all of that. Like if you're going into the office and spending time in your workspace all alone,
right,
then of course it's going to be
right.
That's what makes me crazy about all this stuff. It's like, I'm perfectly fine with having people come to work, just make it worth their while.
Exactly.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
I mean, like, that's where you should be having meetings.
Right.
Right. When I'm looking you in the eye and I can watch your body language.
Yeah.
But the other thing I think for this person too, and I think both of you are right, reflecting on all of the things that you said, especially why you're there and how you're spending your time. But if you wanted to meet other new buddies, probably meeting them in the office might help, right? And so that's where you can meet with people and connect with people. And then, if you're struggling with sort of the intentionality with the company and why you have to be there, have a conversation with your manager about it, and give some feedback and say, hey, if I'm just coming into the office to sit here, that's not a great use of my time or the company's time. But if I'm coming into the office and you want to have a team meeting or you want to have a one-on-one with me, that would be great.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yep.
True that.
True that.
True that.
Okay. Stephen, such a great conversation.
It was wonderful.
So important.
Thank you.
And I really hope that our listeners to like take your advice and do something about these meetings and be stewards of other people's time.
Where can they find you?
Yeah.
The best place to find me is to go to my website, and that is myname.com. So it's StephenRogelberg.com. And I've really tried to make that website into a resource center. So there's tons and tons of materials there that help with skip levels, one-on-ones, and your meetings.
Perfect.
You can definitely find links to my books. And the cool thing is, I'm choosing not to make a penny off my books. Every piece of money I make goes to American Cancer Society.
Oh,
Yay,
So-
you!
yeah,
Buy the
you.
books if you want to learn about meetings, or buy the books if you want to help eradicate cancer.
Yeah,
Both are
perfect.
Great. That's wonderful.
Great.
We love it.
Stephen, you're the good human.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
great.
Yeah.
Thank you both for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to TruthWorks. This episode was produced by Megan Hayward. Thank you to Kathleen Speckert and the whole Edit Audio team.